Hello, everyone, and welcome to Immigration and Jobs Talk Show. I'm your host, Sam, and before moving ahead, let me read out this very important disclaimer. By watching our videos, you agree and understand that the information provided by our experts and attorneys, including comments and replies from users, is not legal advice. So, use of information is at your own risk. All right, after this very important disclaimer, once again, guys, welcome back to Immigration and Jobs Talk Show. And today we are going to talk about post election impact. What does it mean for non immigrant visa processing in 2025? So, guys, after the election, there are so many questions on everyone's mind, especially for non immigrants. What will the visa process look like? Will it speed up or face delays? And will there be some kind of new restrictions on the H-1B visas? And will it become harder for students to apply for F-1 visa? And especially for the mass deportation that Trump has told, and it's been a hot topic. But guys, the best thing is that we have an expert for this. So please help me in joining and welcoming an immigration attorney, Kimberley Best Robidoux. So, Kimberly, welcome, and it's a pleasure having you on our show. Please go ahead and tell our viewers about yourself.
Yeah, thank you very much. I'm really excited to be here and happy to see everybody. As you can tell, the sun is rising here in San Diego. So I'm an immigration attorney with WR Immigration. I'm based in San Diego, California. And I have been working in the immigration arena since the early 90s, way longer than I really probably want to care to admit. But it's interesting to see changes over time, as well as how some things in immigration have always stayed the same. So I'm excited to talk with you about this topic, especially given that our election, just ended 2 weeks ago. So it's really fresh in everybody's minds.
Right, right, of course. So thank you so much, Kimberly, for joining us, and it's a pleasure having you. And it was lovely also to hear about you, as obviously you are an expert in this. So, Kimberly, were you expecting Trump to be back in the White House?
We were cautiously optimistic that we would not have a Trump 2.0 administration. From an immigration perspective, what we had seen with Trump 1.0 and then Trump 1.0 with COVID-19 pandemic on top of it was really, really difficult, not only for foreign nationals in the United States, but, for the immigration community as well. So it was a difficult time. And one of the things that we have seen with what was happening on the campaign and different things that were coming out of, the campaign and President-elect Trump himself were things that weren't necessarily going to be beneficial from an immigration perspective, which also would and will have a significant impact on the U.S. economy. And, if I can be so bold as to say the global economy as well.
All right. I think that's a pretty good background that you have shared with us. So, Kimberly, also, I would like to know that not only for like non-immigrant thing, but I would also like to know that how the future of US as a whole will be. Will it be a new era under Trump's administration, or will people will be, having a nightmare kind of thing?
Well, based on, everything that we've read with respect to Project 2025, as well as what we've heard from the campaign and what we saw previously, right, with his first administration, um, it's going to be really hard times. There's some discussion that maybe there might be some benefits to employment-based immigration, but overall, there's going to be a lot of hard decisions that will be made by companies, by individuals, and we're expecting that based on actions that will be taken by the administration. As I think everybody has heard, the call for mass deportation beginning on day one, which will be day one is January 20th. That's inauguration day. So it's about 2 months away. And we're helping our clients, both corporate clients and individuals, be prepared for kind of the worst case scenario of what could happen. As you say, Sam, a potential nightmare. I'm hoping that it isn't as bad as that, but we have yet to see. So what we have been doing is working from the perspective of let's prepare for the worst case scenario and hope that it doesn't get to be that bad.
Absolutely. And Kimberly, also talked about mass deportation. So I don't know whether it's going to happen or not, but if we look practically, then it is also very difficult, to have millions of people deporting just on a day one. So it's going to be very difficult, not only like for working in a political way, but also it will deteriorate the economy of US too, because there are so many companies of US, who are completely relying on H-1B workers. So, how do you think that will this mass deportation will happen, or how the immigrants should be cautious about it?
Yeah, so in terms of mass deportation, you're right, Sam. It's not only very difficult from an operational perspective, but it's also incredibly expensive to deport a lot of people in a really fast period of time. So what we were or what we are expecting that could happen is targeted workforce um, actions, meaning that immigration and customs enforcement would more likely than not conduct worksite enforcements at various companies within various industries that might tend to have a higher population of undocumented, or as the administration likes to say, and some people call it illegal immigrants. There also can be, and more likely will be, a focus on individuals who have criminal records and who are already in the immigration system, so to speak, with respect to having been to immigration court and have been in removal proceedings, have stays of action. So individuals who already are in the quote unquote system would be, a primary target, right? Because they're known pretty much where they're located. So immigration and customs enforcement would more likely than not focus on those individuals first. But what can happen with the raids? I mean, they're worksite enforcement activities. There could be raids. It just depends on how the administration is going to pursue their process for deportation. And as you mentioned, Sam, it isn't just an impact on the individuals, right? It's an impact on the organization, because as if a company loses employees, then that disrupts the business operations. It also has that ripple effect within the community, right? So if there aren't employees that are going to a company to work, then businesses within that area can be impacted as well, right? Food trucks, restaurants won't be getting their customers, grocery stores,
Mm-hmm.
clothing, retail facilities are all going to be impacted as well. And then if you have individuals also working at organizations who have some type of work authorized status, such as, where they're sponsored by the employer in TN or H-1B or maybe even O-1, their positions could potentially be impacted as well if the organization has to have cutbacks because they're unable to fulfill orders or complete projects timely because of loss of certain personnel that may not have had appropriate work authorization in the US. So those are the concerns, that it's not just the individuals who will be deported, but how that will have a ripple effect throughout the economy and then in communities as well. And if I can just do a public service announcement out there for individuals, specifically in California, where I practice law. Individuals who are not U.S. citizens or permanent residents in the United States might want to make sure that if they have children, that they have some type of caregiver agreement in place, which is they create a legal document in California, and what that does is if they are taken by ICE, this caregiver agreement will provide instructions and guidance to say so and so and uncle friend has the permission to be guardian and pick up my child from school, can help out with finances with the children, etc. So that's like even outside of the scope of what I do, but it's something that I think is really important for people to consider. As heartbreaking as that is, it's one of the ways to become proactive and be prepared for anything that might happen.
Absolutely, absolutely. And thank you so much, Kimberly, for sharing such important information with us. And also, Kimberly, you talked about ICE also. And we know that, Tom Homan is going to lead ICE, and he is a very practical man, and that too very blunt. So he doesn't care about family separation. He's also like against DACA, and completely against with illegal immigrants. So do you think that we are going to expect some kind of brutality from Tom Homan's side, or will there be some kind of violent attacks, or like, yeah, what it will be?
So yeah, as Tom Homan has said, if it means family separation, then that is essentially not his problem. So I have had that question before of, well, how is it that a U.S. citizen could be deported in respect to family separation? Well, it isn't that the U.S. citizen would be deported. So I'm talking about situations where the parents might be undocumented or not have legal status in the U.S. and they're deported and they have U.S. citizen children. What Tom Homan is talking about is if the parents are deported, then essentially, in order to prevent family separation, the children would want to go, with the parents as they leave the United States. So that's, in a way, that is family separation, but the opposite of what we have seen in the past, right? Family separation, everybody thinks in their mind is people who are coming across the border and then they're detained and the
Right.
families are split apart. This is a little bit different. And I think it's more egregious, right? You're disrupting children who are, or potentially disrupting children in the US.
Absolutely, absolutely. And also, Kimberly, I would like to know that, what kind be there some kind of biggest challenges, especially for non-immigrant visa applicants, that we are going to look in 2025?
Oh, so some of the biggest challenges, I'll do high level, and I'm sure we can get into a little more descriptions, but biggest challenges are potential travel bans. So another public service announcement for anybody who is not a US citizen, we highly recommend, if you're traveling during the holidays, which are starting very soon, to make sure to return to the US before Inauguration Day on January 20th of 2025, because we don't know if there will be travel bans or restrictions on entering the United States. So we don't want anybody to get stuck abroad. We can also expect an increase in delays in the consular processing of visa applications for people who need that visa stamp to come to the US. We saw that previously, and the consular posts under the State Department still have not been able to increase their staff to limits pre-Trump 1.0. So they're still working at a disadvantage, which has been essentially, in a way, beneficial in that a lot of interviews for the visa applications have been waived. We will likely see the demise of that policy. So we would expect that every visa application would require an interview at the consular post, which would more likely than not result in delays in the processing of the visa stamps. Some of the other things that we can, expect is backlogs at USCIS here in the United States with the processing of applications and petitions. So those would be, H-4 applications, H-1B petitions, Ls, like the alphabet of immigration, non-immigrant visa categories, as well as more likely than not an increase in requests for evidence. And we had seen that under the prior Trump administration, where there was a significant increase in those RFEs that were at one point over 40% of petitions were being issued RFEs, which resulted in higher costs for employers and individuals to respond to those RFEs, as well as just delay in the processing of those cases, which in some circumstances can mean a gap in employment authorization, which will have a negative impact on the company as well as an individual's financial situation.
Absolutely, absolutely. So, Kimberly, do you also think that the election results is going to impact on the processing of visas for family members of non-immigrant visa holders, and especially such as dependents on H-4 or L-2 visas?
Yeah, I do. So in January of 2023, there was a settlement that brought back the bundling of processing of the H-1B and H-4 cases together, as well as L-1 and L-2. So what had happened in the past is those principal workers had their cases adjudicated, and then the applications that were submitted for their dependent family members were processed at the same time. And then under Trump point one, that bundling was removed, primarily because for all I-539 non-immigrant applications, such as H-4, L-2, J-2, et cetera, those individuals had to have their biometrics taken, which meant appointments at the application service centers, which resulted in delays because those appointments couldn't be scheduled typically within a premium processing period of time. So we expect the biometrics requirement will likely come back, but will be reinstituted by USCIS. And then that settlement that went into effect on January was January 25th, I think, 2023, has a 2-year validity period. So at the end of January of 2025, that settlement agreement that required the bundling of the principal employees and the dependents cases together will no longer exist. So more likely than not, given that that will now be under the Trump 2.0 administration, we would likely see an unbundling, right, of those cases. So that will have a tremendous impact as well on the processing for dependents.
Right, right. And Kimberly, also, do you think that the rules for getting H-1B or L-1 visa could change? And if yes, then is there some certain jobs or industries, that will be more affected than others?
Yeah, so with both of those, we're likely to see an increase in the request for evidence. We also had seen in the prior Trump administration an increase in the scrutiny of L1 applications under company blanket petitions at US consular posts. And so that, coupled with a delay in the consular processing, might result in significant delays in individuals being transferred from abroad to the US within their same corporate organization. The RFEs could also, as I said, have a tremendous impact, which, if those RFEs then result in a denial of the petition, that means a loss of the employment authorization, which could trigger, requirement for the individual and family members to leave the US and then wait until maybe there's another petition that's filed in the US, or there's an appeal, or there's a lawsuit before the person can be brought back to the state. So that's like the really ultimate worst case scenario. And then under the Biden administration, there was a modernization act for H-1Bs. And part of that modernization act was already implemented that primarily affected the H-1B cap process, as we saw last year, where it became more beneficiary centric, as well as, specific requirements that were needed for the registration process. And that was partly to reduce fraud. The Modernization Act pieces of that weren't implemented were changes to the definition of the H-1B specialty occupation, as well as the definition of employer-employee relationship, which becomes really critical when you're dealing with startup organizations in which the founder is someone who needs H-1B classification. Also, the Modernization Act, which has not yet been addressed, is bona fide H-1B employment, which could be increased reviews by the fraud detection unit to make sure that these H-1B petitions are not fraudulent petitions. And then there was also a cap gap protection and an expansion of cap exempt for certain nonprofit industries. So we have yet to see if the remainder of that Modernization Act is going to go into effect before the end of the Biden administration. And so that's one of the things that we're really closely watching. So we'll wait and see what happens with that. But we do, expect some additional changes with the H-1B program, just as the new administration will tighten the requirements for the H-1B petition. They could also, if they're able to get Congress to act, which might be very viable right now, given that Republicans control both our House of Representatives and our Senate, it could result in legislation that would reduce the number of H-1B visas that are available, which we know is already not sufficient for the workforce as needed by employers.
Exactly. And I can see that, the way you are explaining, it's really great. But I don't find that 2025 is going to be very, smoothing season for H-1B workers and also for L-1 visas too. But All right, I think with guidance and with expert advice, immigrants can definitely make their jobs and industries better. So, Kimberly, you talked about H-1B visa and L-1 visa too. So now I would like to talk about F-1 visa too. So, how might the new administration's policy will impact the international students who are coming to the US on F-1 visa?
Yeah, it's a good question with respect to the students. So, unfortunately, again, I have to say that there could be, backlogs with the consular
Yeah.
visa application process. So that could um, result in delays of the individuals getting their F-1 visa stamps that they need to come to the United States. So that's an impact that we would likely see. And then individuals who are in the United States who might be changing their status, for instance, from H-4 to F-1, there could be delays in the processing of those applications, which would impact when they'd be able to commence their studies at this university. There's also as many, of the people who are watching today, and you might know that there's been a lot of attacks over the last years, several years, by different organizations. One primarily is the Washington Alliance of Technology Workers that has been trying to essentially eliminate the STEM OPT extension, and to a certain extent, OPT as well. Back in October 2023, our US Supreme Court denied the petition for a writ of certiorari, which meant that they upheld the lower court's decision that said that the STEM OPT stands as it has been enacted through regulatory measures by Immigration and Customs Enforcement. So depending on, what pressures are on the administration and what internally we can see through policies with Stephen Miller, STEM OPT could have could be significantly impacted if the administration or decides that we don't want STEM OPT, or we don't want the full 24 months of STEM OPT. So that is definitely something that we are wanting to look at very closely to see if that will be negatively impacted by any of the administration actions that might happen. And that is something to consider, because the incoming administration is what they're how they're acting, and what they're saying is essentially protecting the American workforce, and they're protecting the American workforce in ways that will actually harm the American workforce, in my belief, and what I've seen within my immigration attorney community. Because if we don't have essential workers, then that has a tremendous impact on the economy. And as a lot of us probably know, we don't have sufficient American or U.S. citizen and permanent resident workers to actually fill a lot of the positions. We need to educate our youth more in STEM degrees, and until then, we really want to continue to attract the best and brightest from around the world, and have an open environment for people to be able to stay in the U.S. So if H-1Bs are negatively impacted, or even TNs for Canadians and Mexican citizens, then I could also see a decrease in foreign national students wanting to come to the United States to universities. So that would have an impact on, like, a decrease in the use of the F-1 visa classification, not because of a direct administration action to say, no, we're going to deny the visa application, but rather, the loss of individuals who are actually interested in coming to the US for education and might seek education elsewhere.
Absolutely. And Kimberly, thank you so much. I'm really loving the conversation that we are going through. So, but Kimberly, I would also like to ask you that, we also have interviews with different attorneys, and they say right now that as Trump is going to be back in White House, so, most of the immigrants, they are afraid and they are trying their level best to leave US before Trump's rule. So, are you also getting calls? Are you also been into the situation that you are on people's mind, and they're completely coming to you and they're asking for the help, what to do and what not to do? Is it so?
Yeah, there are definitely a lot more questions
Hmm.
from both individuals as well as from companies, right? So a lot of the corporate clients with whom we work are concerned about losing some, really valuable employees through a
Yeah.
scare of, reduction in H-1Bs, the removal of, potentially removal of DACA, as well as TPS, which is temporary protected status. So those are, in our workforce, we still have a lot of individuals who don't have sponsorship by an employer and whose status in the United States could be significantly impacted. So we do have, a lot of calls from individuals who are on DACA or TPS to understand, how does this impact them, right?
Mhm.
TPS is at the discretion of Department of Homeland Security. And a lot of the TPS work authorization and designations are valid. Some of them will expire in March of 2025. So there's concern right now, is the Biden administration going to extend those? Will the new administration cut them off immediately? What kind of impact does it have to those individuals, and what alternatives do they have to be able to remain in the US if they decide that they want to remain in the US? So yes, Tim, there are a lot of questions that are being, I guess, thrown at us, and in that sense
Right.
of, hey, I want to understand what's happening, and I think
Mhm.
that's really important for people to have an understanding of where they are with respect to their status and how they could potentially be impacted, so that they could, like companies are doing, plan and strategize and have a strategy to the extent possible ready if we have that worst case scenario. So those are really some key things. Like here in California, we plan for earthquakes. We have our go bag, for individuals, plan for the worst case scenario, a denial of an H-1B
Mhm.
petition, how would that impact their family life? And then for individuals who are undocumented, as I mentioned, having certain plans in place for caregiver agreements or people who can step in and help out with their finances or what happens to their apartments. And those are some things that, are tangential to losing a job, but it's really important. If you have a U.S. worker, U.S. citizen who loses a job, they
Mhm.
can stay here. But if a foreign national loses their job, they more likely than not might have to leave under the Trump administration. So those those questions are definitely important, and I think it is important for people to have an understanding of how they can be impacted directly and have a
Mhm.
strategy in place.
Right, right, absolutely. And Kimberly, one more thing I want to ask you that, we definitely going through about the US situation, what is happening right now. But here's a question that I want to ask that, there are so many undocumented immigrants also who are living and staying in US. So till now, they didn't get any time to make their documents clear or what it was, because, that has been quite a long time to prepare their documents. But why is it so much fear around the undocumented immigrants? Because they got time. So why is this that they still don't have the documents?
Oh, so why do people still not have authorization or status in the US? Um, it's a good question. And our bottom line, our immigration system is really complex and it's
Mhm.
has a lot of flaws. So if you don't mind me giving a little bit of history of
Yeah,
what
sure.
happened. Yeah, so in 1996, under President Clinton, who is a Democrat, we had the last major immigration reform, and re, we refer to it as IRA. Under that provision, or that act that came out, there was a provision that put in place what we call unlawful presence,
Mhm.
meaning if someone is admitted into the United States, they're admitted for a certain period of time. If they stay beyond that authorized period of time without having an extension pending or a change of status pending or taking some action, then they become unlawfully present in the U.S. If someone is unlawfully present for up to for 180 days, but less than 365 days, once they leave the United States, they cannot come back for 3 years unless they can obtain some type of non-immigrant waiver. If someone is unlawfully present for 365 days or longer, then when they leave the United States, they are barred from returning to the US for 10 years unless they can show that they are they can get an extreme hardship waiver. And those are really difficult to obtain based on the criteria. So we created this undocumented class of individuals who were fearful of leaving the United States because once they did, they couldn't come back for 3 years or 10 years. And that was the only mechanism where these waivers or remain outside of the United States for that period of time. We, in Congress, there was an immigration reform bill that was passed by the Senate in 2013. And then it had full support, bipartisan support by the House of Representatives. But the Speaker of the House at the time, John Boehner, refused to bring that bill to the floor in the House of Representatives because he knew that there was strong bipartisan support and that it would be passed. And then it would be signed by President Obama. And Speaker Boehner did not want any type of immigration reform credit to be given to President Obama. So the bill died. And that was a really good reform act in that it alleviated these 3 and 10 year bar triggers. It also provided visas for what we call guest workers. So for individuals who come into the United States who are in jobs that I would say like US citizens don't normally want to do, right? If there's people in landscaping, construction, nannies, like they're really, really tough jobs, agriculture. So we've created, in a sense, an undocumented population by, those 3 and 10 year bars, which have created problems for people to essentially correct their status. So there have been different provisions put in place that have tried to soften that a little bit, but under a Trump 2.0 administration, those are going to be almost impossible to obtain. And just to answer your question in terms of, well, what about people who've been here for more than, 9, 10 years? Because our immigration system is very limited with respect to visa types that people can obtain. If you have someone who falls into this undocumented category and are subject to the 3 or 10 year bars, it's really impossible to get their status corrected. Again, unless they leave the US and are out for a significant period of time. And then also, we don't have visa classifications for a lot of individuals who would normally and are, employed in some really key positions in the US. And by key, I mean those jobs that US citizens might not want to do. So the grunt work types of jobs, so to speak.
All right, I think that's great, because these are the questions that most of the people have in their mind, and they are completely, they get confused what it is. But I think, Kimberly, you were absolutely, it was so good to hear about the history, that why it is happening, and, how they can also work on this. So thank you so much, Kimberly, for your outstanding answer. And I'm really loving this. And absolutely, you are a great speaker, as we all know. So I'm really admiring it right now. And Kimberly, why don't we go ahead and take up viewers' question too, because they are also having a quite a long question. So I'm going to take firstly Cynthia's question. So Cynthia is asking that I am planning to apply for an H-1B visa in early 2025. Should I be concerned about new regulations or executive orders disrupting the usual process? What can I do to prepare for potential delays or increased scrutiny?
That's a good question. So I'm assuming that this is in reference to the H-1B cap, which would we anticipate that registration will occur in March, as it has since, well, forever. But the registration itself, I mean, for H-1B cap in the past, for many, many years, we had to get the cases in by April 1st. Beginning in March of 2020, we went to that electronic registration process, which we were all skeptical of at first, but it has for the most part worked. So that will be in March.
Oh.
At this point in time, it's probably there isn't enough time, is not enough time to implement a new regulation that would change that particular registration process. The registration fee has gone up to $215 this coming 2025. It was $10 last fiscal year, March of 2025. So that was implemented under the Biden administration, along with primarily all the other fee increases that went into effect April 1st. So it's a significant increase for employers to pay the registration fee. And what could happen are these triggers that would say for H-1B specialty occupation, there's a more strict definition of what is a specialty occupation. Or there could be that salary requirement, which means that the salaries that are offered have to be higher. What we use in the Department of Labor's wage survey, there's 4 levels. So it's looking what the prior Trump 2.0 wanted to do was make it essentially level 4, which when you're looking at someone in entry level and getting a level 4 wage, that's a significant increase, and that could discourage employers from sponsoring. So what can somebody do? Work with your employer, right? If you know which employers agree to sponsor under the H-1B cap registration, talk to your employer about your concerns of, how is this going to impact us? Employers that work with immigration attorneys usually do work really closely with determining who the company wants to put in the registration. And then a lot of times there's an assessment that is completed to look at, is there going to be an issue with the specialty occupation? If so, how do we deal with that up front, right? What kind of research or do we need to do in order to prepare for that? As well as looking at what is the wage survey, what will be the prevailing wage? And then can a company use an alternative wage survey? So those are the nitty-gritty issues that the company would discuss with the employer. But usually information will be passed along to employees. Hey, there's going to be a change in the H-1B cap process, or there's going to be a change in the requirements. So I would say be on the lookout for those potential changes, and they should be addressed or broadcast by the attorneys and the company, but they will definitely, be in the news for sure if there's changes with respect to that. And then also, one of the things that we do is we work with our corporate clients and foreign national employees. Are those we consider last chancers, right? So last chancers are those who, if they're not selected in the H-1B lottery, then they have no, what is their alternative to be able to remain in the U.S.? So that, in essence, if we're looking at significant changes to the cap process, if they do happen, then in my mind, a lot of people we would be treating as essentially last chancers. So looking at what are alternative strategies to get different types of work authorization in the U.S., such as an O1, which is for extraordinary ability individuals, or is this a situation where somebody might need to go work abroad for a year or so and then be transferred back to the U.S.? But that's a really long answer for the question, but I just wanted to think about all the different angles of it and things to consider.
But that's how, we want answers. We want everything to be clear, and that's how you're answering. Thank you so much, Kimberly, and thank you so much, Cynthia, for participating in today's episode. And next up, Kimberly, we are going to take question from Fawad Ali. So he's asking that I'm currently on an F-1 visa and considering transitioning to OPT. With the potential for stricter rules post election, should I expedite my application, or is it safe to wait for my planned timeline?
So the university is in charge of granting and issuing the Form I-20 with the OPT recommendation or approval. I do recommend for individuals that have the option to premium process a case at the Immigration Service that be utilized. So I understand that premium processing is expensive. All premium processing now is well over $1,000 for the Immigration Service to process cases, applications, and petitions, quote unquote, faster than normal processing. But I strongly recommend utilizing premium processing if at all possible, unless there's a strategic reason not to. We have that in certain situations. So I'm just thinking with OPT, I don't see any strategic reason not to utilize the premium processing. Again, you just want to address your current specific situation, but that would be one of the ways that I can see, ensuring or trying to get ahead of the processing of an application before Trump 2.0.
All right, all right. And also, Kimberly, I need to ask you something that, mostly we have seen in US companies that they prefer employer sponsored visas rather than individual merit. So, are we going to see any kind of change in how the applicants are being evaluated? Will the individual merits be getting more preferences, or how it's going to be for them?
Oh, so yeah, under Project 2025, there is some discussion about changing our immigration system to be more focused on individual merit,
Yeah.
and potentially going to a point system, but primarily looking at individual merit. At
Mm-hmm.
this point in time, we do not have that in our immigration system, and
Mm-hmm.
most employers essentially when they're interviewing and when they're recruiting for a job, and then when they're interviewing applicants, they're looking at who's the best fit for the company. And in many times, I've actually seen some companies that have never sponsored anybody in the past, and they're willing to do it because they found that unicorn, right? That one person who the hiring manager really, really likes, and the individual who will be a good fit in the organization.
Mm-hmm.
So I would, until there's some change in the regulations or the law, I would expect employers to continue to recruit and interview and offer, extend offers of employment, based on the particular qualities of the individual and if there is a visa option for that individual. So
Mm-hmm.
those are some of the things that we see usually um, with companies that don't want to sponsor. They do have a policy that says they're not going to sponsor for any positions, and sometimes that's from a business operations perspective because it just takes too long to obtain certain visa classifications, or it's more, it's financially burdensome for the organization. So from a business operations perspective, there are some companies that choose not to sponsor individuals, but otherwise, that individual merit based system in our immigration system in the United States has not been implemented. It's been primarily discussed within the Project 2025 document in prior Trump administration.
Mm-hmm. All right, all right. So I think that we can also look for a good change, though, because till now mostly it was preferring the employer-based visas, but now we can also have a hope for individual merit too. So, Kimberly, also one more thing I would like to ask, as you mentioned about Project 2025. We have went through that, and we have seen that how disturbing it is, how extreme it is. Trump himself said that he is not going to implement, not clearly, but some on the other we found in his statement that he's not favoring Project 2025. But the irony is that in Project 2025, we can see 100 times it's mentioning about Trump itself. So, what can you say on this? Do you think that it's kind of tactics that Trump is trying to play in front of people, or what it is?
Oh, that's a loaded question. So by seeing who Trump is appointing to his administration at the cabinet level, some of those individuals, such as Stephen Miller, I think his first name is Kenneth Vogt,
Mhm.
who's he want President-elect Trump wants to be in Office of Management and Budget, and a couple other people have been individuals who have been proponents of Project 2025, as well as individuals who have helped to write Project 2025. So by President-elect Trump's actions alone of bringing those individuals into his administration, to me, says, I am embracing Project 2025.
Mhm.
Maybe he's not embracing all of Project 2025, but it seems pretty clear to me from the actions
Mhm.
that Project 2025 is, in fact, a big part of, or will be definitely a part of, the administration's policies and systems. So that's how I'm looking at it from that perspective.
Mhm.
Um, for Project 2025. So we are anticipating that some of those proposals will be implemented or will try to be implemented.
Right, right. And I think, by seeing the list of Project 2025, most of the people are scared. But let's see how it does. As you also mentioned, that maybe some of the policies he may implement and some of them it's not. So, all right. Thank you so much, Kimberly, for your answers. And now I would also like to ask some questions from the Facebook group as well. So, here's a situation that I would like to read it out. That is that I have a question to me and my brother and sisters, and my mom came from another country here back in 1988. My mom passed. She had an aneurysm, leaving my brother and my sister without any papers. We came here legally on a plane. I'm worried with the situation has going on with Trump and want to get them help. Do you know what can we do? My sister has a mental breakdown as my brother since my mom's passing, which it makes it even harder to deal with things. I just want to get some help.
I'm really sorry to hear about that. That's really heartbreaking. Um, the my recommendation and the best thing to do is to seek guidance of an experienced immigration attorney who works with individuals within the community that do not have any status in the United States in order to determine what potential areas of relief are available. um, and Sam, we had talked about this a little bit earlier, like why have some people stayed in the US and not corrected their status in all these years? And unfortunately, sometimes there's just no options, or the option has been to leave the United States for 10 years and then come back, which being outside the United States for 10 years can create incredible hardship, especially on family members. We have several situations where so a U.S. citizen has married a foreign national who, is, excuse me, is undocumented, and because they had entered without inspection or they had certain violations, they were subject to that 10-year bar and would have to leave the U.S. for 10 years. So that's, that in a way that's a solution, but it's not a good solution for many people, right? Leaving your
Mhm.
home essentially is really difficult. So my recommendation and guidance is to really seek out an experienced attorney in the area in which you live. And one of the things that you can look on for the under the bar associations, they'll have, sometimes they have pro bono lists, so that might be an option to start there, or to reach out to one of the immigration associations like Catholic Charities or the Immigrant Justice Project, just to see if they have recommendations, because I don't want anybody to get in a situation where they're dealing with, an notario or an attorney who doesn't understand that particular area of law. So it's really important to find someone who is experienced and can help out, but with having that consultation.
Absolutely. And I think, guys, we have Kimberly, so I think it will be great to contact attorney Kimberly Best Robidoux. And not only in case of anything about H-1B or L-1, you can also contact her related to any problems or any, processing of immigration that you're going through. So here's her contact details that I would like to read it out. Her contact number is 619-826-4010. You can also email her at krobidoux at wolfsdorf.com, and you can also visit her website, that is www.wolfsdorf.com. All right, so thank you so much, guys, for being for participating in today's session, and to Kimberly too. Moving ahead, Kimberly, there are some different questions also that I would like to ask. That there are so many participants who keeps on commenting and keeps on texting us. So now I think it's the best time to take up those questions. So yeah, Kimberly, there's another thing that anonymous participant is asking. My husband and I have paid an immigration lawyer $9,000 so far for his case. She has not submitted his packet to USCIS. Today, we received an email asking for more money. Times are getting harder. What would you do?
Well, I don't know the particular circumstances of
Mhm.
the situation, so I can, comment on, different types of applications and petitions take different periods of time. Um, so, for instance, if someone, an immigration attorney, is working on an EB1 preference category for extraordinary ability or outstanding researcher, or even EB2 national interest waiver, that can take 3 to 6 months to prepare the petition in detail, to gather the information, help write the employment or the recommendation letters, put the case together. So that is an out of the norm for a case like that to take 3 to 6 months to prepare. For other cases such as marriage to U.S. citizen, where there's an I-130 immediate relative petition concurrently being filed, possibly with an application to adjust status, that can take a couple of months to prepare, and that's after an attorney receives all of the documentation and information necessary to prepare the case.
Mhm.
If there are exigent circumstances and there's a deadline, then an attorney should be made aware of the deadline. And most likely, once they are aware of the deadline, then a case can be rushed in order to, file something so that an individual does not go out of status. So those are some factors to consider. And then I also look at what was in the services contract, or some people call it an engagement letter. So what did that say? Did it say that the attorney was preparing, specifically what is the attorney preparing, and what is the fee for that preparation? And is the attorney asking for additional amount now because those are the filing fees that need to be submitted to USCIS, versus asking for more money to adjudicate or to prepare the case? So those are some things that I would look at. I would definitely look at that agreement that you have between you and the attorney, to understand specifically what it is stated in that agreement for the attorney to be preparing, and what the fees are. Those should be clearly stated in the agreement. And anything outside of that, you definitely need to ask the attorney, for specific information about why they're asking for additional funding or fees. I That's really important.
Absolutely, absolutely. So, thank you so much, Kimberly, for your answer. And next up, we have received a question from Shani Tracy. So, her question is that my fiance was recently detained by ICE. He is a Rwandan refugee here in the US, legally I-94. We need help. He has some misdemeanors which led to them detaining him, located in the DFW area, seeking pro bono assistance.
So that would be Dallas Fort Worth. I would check with, I think there's a Catholic Charities there, or an immigrant justice project of the
Mhm.
American Bar Association. But also, I'm not sure if Texas Bar Association has a list of pro bono attorneys like the California Bar Association has. So that might be an area to focus on. Um, there's also one of the things to look at in the Dallas Fort Worth area is to look at any kind of, one of the other things I have had people do is contact the immigration clinics at various law schools. They might be helpful, or they definitely have the pulse, on their pulse on the community, and can know, or more likely will have the information to make referrals to specific individuals in that area who can address that particular situation. Because with ICE, um, there's a lot of work that goes into sometimes contacting ICE, trying to get to the right ICE officer, just trying to get the right information to find out, where the individual is being detained, and then work through that process. So those are some of the people I would recommend reaching out to right away, in order to get someone who is essentially boots on the ground in that community area, in order to help out with that situation.
All right, all right. Thank you so much, Kimberly, and I'm sure that Shani is definitely going to accept the all the conversation that she's listening right now. And also, we have next question that we have from G Annie, and he's saying that, "Hi everyone, can someone tell me if I should do anything else after I file the I-130 online? Also, in the form, I put in the address Canada since my parents were visiting my sister during that time. I even put in Canada address for the closest consulate to conduct the interview. I don't know if I did it correctly or not, but now my parents are back in Philippines. Should I do something about it?
All right, so that's a very case specific situation, right? And so after filing an I-130 petition, typically there isn't anything that can be done to make corrections unless there's a request for evidence that's issued, or potentially after an approval of the I-130 petition, it's sent to the National Visa Center. And at that point in time, at the National Visa Center, if the National Visa Center says, well, we're scheduling the immigrant visa at the pardon me, at the U.S. consular post in Montreal, um, then there's the ability to say, well, the beneficiaries do not live in Canada; they live in Philippines, and here's proof of their lawful status in the Philippines. And then the National Visa Center, which is part of the State Department, can work to adjust that immigrant visa application process from Montreal in Canada to the Philippines. But if there are specific questions, before then, in terms of anything that may have been that might need to be addressed, I would again speak directly with an immigration attorney who you would retain that
Mhm.
can look over the actual, the full on petition, understand all the particulars, because even though it might seem like nothing or just a really small point, can be a huge
Right.
factor in determining what to do next.
Absolutely. We really have to be very much particular about all the information that we are sharing and we are receiving. All right. So here we have another question from Delgado, and he's asking that can I apply for citizenship if I lost my green card? I am eligible to become citizen, but I don't process my green card. What can I do?
Yeah, so permanent resident status is based on, it gives you the ability to live and work in the United States, and the card is just evidence of that status. You don't typically need a valid card. Like if you let your card expire or you lose your card, it doesn't mean that you lose your permanent resident status, unless if you've been abroad for many, many years or for a significant period of time, or you don't pay or file a U.S. tax return. So those are all other issues that could impact
Yeah.
green card status or permanent resident status. But if it's a matter of somebody has maintained their permanent resident status in the United States and they've let their card expire, you may still be able to apply for naturalization, because naturalization has its own requirements with respect to having been a permanent resident for at least 5 years, unless you're married to a US citizen, which can reduce that time to 3 years. Being physically present in the United States for at least half of that 3 or 5 year period of time. Continuous physical presence in the United States, meaning no more than 6 months in a row outside of the United States, and then having a good moral character, as well as being able to read, write, and understand English and pass the civics test. So those are the criteria over, generally for naturalization. If someone is required to apply for a new permanent resident card and pay the hundreds of dollars for that card while their application for naturalization is pending, is again like something specific with respect to the timing that should be addressed with an attorney based on the particular circumstances of the individual. Because in some circumstances, the person can file their N-400 naturalization application without having to apply to get a new permanent resident card. But there are strict,
Yeah.
criteria around that. So that would have depend on a case by case situation.
Absolutely, absolutely. Okay, so next up, we are going to take this question. So, I need help. My brother in law came here illegally and has been married to my sister for 3 years, and they have children together, and they don't want to know what steps. No, no, sorry. I'm so sorry. Uh, I'm reading it again. Okay, I think I fumbled in between. So yeah, here it is. Here's a question that I need help. My brother-in-law came here illegally and has been married to my sister for 3 years, and they have children together and they don't what steps to take to get his papers started. They fear what their future may look like. So what should they do to have some form of security in these hard times? Oh god, this is something very, you know, very critical topic. So how do you
Yeah.
say?
So in that situation, if someone has entered without inspection, meaning they crossed the border not at appropriate ports of entry and were not admitted and inspected by an officer at the port of entry, then typically trying to write your status is pretty much impossible unless you obtain a provisional waiver of the extreme. I'm sorry, a provisional extreme hardship waiver, or potentially reside outside the United States for 10 years. So those are the heartbreaking scenarios where we see that there might not be a particular solution, or a solution that is not something that a family wants to go through because it means separation of the family members. So in
Mhm.
this particular, in this circumstance, and then in anyone who has anything similar, my advice again is to seek experienced immigration counsel to discuss the very specifics of the background, the history, current status, looking to see if there are any available options to proceed with obtaining valid status in the US. But also, unfortunately, in these times right now where we're expecting, Trump 2.0 in 60 days, um, working not only with an immigration attorney, but potentially also another attorney or um, professional that can help get everything in order with respect to, as I mentioned, in California, there's a caregiver document. There are similar documents throughout the country in every different state, as well as getting things in place with, picking up, how do I get my last paycheck? How do we pay the rent? What do we do with our property? How do we have like a family tree contact list, so to speak? So, again, preparing for the worst in case there is action taken by ICE for deportation. So that's a piece of it. And then the other piece of it is looking at what options are available. And, some of the things that even looking at now, is it smart, or is it a good idea to actually put someone forth with an application or a petition where you're putting somebody vulnerable into the immigration system, where it can be easier for ICE to find that information. So those are things that really need to be considered and discussed with an attorney.
Absolutely,
Which,
absolutely. So I think that's very important, because now people only think about how the policies are, how the process is, but we don't see that what problems do they really face. So I think this is also very important, Kimberly, to mention, and you mentioned it beautifully. So Kimberly, this is the last question that I would like to take up, and okay, let's take from this question from a viewer,
okay.
that is Madhvi. So Madhvi is asking that my employer is planning to sponsor me for an H-1B next year, but we concerned about potential caps or quotas being reduced. Is this likely scenario, and how can employers overcome this risk?
Um, so decreasing the number of H-1B visas would take an act of Congress. It may or may not be possible for Trump 2.0 and the administration to take that up before we have the H-1B cap registration in March. It's definitely something that everybody is going to be watching and looking to see what happens. Um, in terms of how to prepare, the best thing to prepare is to prepare as if the registration is happening, that we'll have the same number of visas for H-1Bs, and then look at the alternative strategies if the registration is not selected in the H-1B cap. So does the individual have optional practical training or STEM OPT that can get them through another year? So look at those alternatives to the H-1B cap. And then if there are no alternatives, what does that mean in terms of potentially getting prepared to having to leave the US? So those are all good conversations and things to discuss in advance. With respect to H-1B cap lottery, I mean, we've seen the percentage of being selected
Yeah.
getting lower each year. So those who have less than an advanced degree from a U.S. university have had definitely under 30% likelihood of being selected in the lottery. And then those who have an advanced degree from a U.S. university have had slightly greater than 30% chance of being selected. So even without a decrease in the visa numbers, we also already unfortunately have very low selection rates because of the significant demand. Um, but thinking about it, we could have less demand this year, with employers saying, "Well, the registration fee is $215, so we have to be really careful about who we select to put in the registration." So the selection rate may go up. So I don't know. It's a mixed bag right now, and I hate to say that as an attorney, like it depends, but in this scenario, I think it does depend. And the best thing to do is just prepare for what if I'm not selected in the registration. What does that look, and what are the options?
Absolutely. And this is the same thing that I would also like to suggest to our viewers also, that guys, it's very important to, contact an expert attorney to get the right guidance, so that you don't do something that, you can get into hurdle with. So it's very important to stay updated and to stay informed on everything that is happening. So that is why it's very important to like, share, and subscribe to Immigration and Jobs Talk Show to attend our everyday live shows, that we have with different attorneys with different topics. And you can also get a chance to participate in this conversation by commenting and by replying to us. So it's going to be a great opportunity. And well, Kimberly, we have come across to our almost 1 hour, and it has been wonderful experience from my side. I really enjoyed, and you were outstanding, you were clear, practical, and to the point. And I really enjoyed this session. How was it, like, how did you feel it? How was your experience?
Oh, this has been fantastic. Thank you so much, Sam. It's been, as you can tell, a great topic. Unfortunately, we're having to talk about some really hard issues and tough
Yeah,
topics, and the discussion isn't happy discussion. But I think it's really important that
exactly.
people are getting prepared and are arming themselves with knowledge, right? Knowledge is power. So I think that's really, really important. And thank you for bringing this to your viewers, so that they have that knowledge and they can, protect themselves or plan for the future. I appreciate it so much.
From our side also, thank you so much, Kimberly, for sharing these insightful information with us. And it has really been a great, great session, and a very insightful session too. So guys, if you would like to contact attorney Kimberly Best Robidoux, then please go ahead and contact her right now on the given details, that is 619-826-4010. You can also email her on krobidoux at wolfsdorf.com, and you can also visit our website, that is www.wolfsdorf.com. All right, guys, so thank you so much to everyone, to each one of you who has participated and who has watched our session till the end. Thank you so much, and keep on like, share, and subscribe to Immigration and Jobs Talk Show. I'm Sam, signing off for now, and thank you so much to attorney Kimberly Best Robidoux. Have a great day.
Thank you, Sam.
Thank you, guys.